Antichrist never actually appears in the text, but it does refer to a despotic prince who is to come during a time of turmoil.
The world will be in turmoil, and the world will be looking for one significant leader that will draw the world together under the banner of peace and safety.
He will bring prosperity to the world. He will affect the economies of the world in a positive way.
He will confirm a covenant with many for 1 week.
A biblical week, believers assert, is equal to 7 calendar years.
What really triggers the 7-year period of tribulation is the agreement that the Antichrist negotiates with Israel. It's a peace treaty for 7 years.
In the middle of the week, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering.
3.5 years into that, he will break that treaty.
He shall speak blasphemies against the God of gods.
His ultimate characteristic is pride. He believes he's better than God, he believes he's higher than God, he deserves to be enthroned.
But is the book of Daniel truly prophetic of the Antichrist and the end of time scenario? Or is there another interpretation of the references which points to a real-life despotic ruler who usurps the divine order? The book of Daniel was probably written between 167 and 164 BC, during the time of the persecution of the Jews under the Seleucid Syrian Emperor Antiochus IV. Many experts believe that references to the character that fundamentalist Christians see as the Antichrist actually pertain to this Syrian despot.
Antiochus IV, and in the course of taking control of Jerusalem, begins to take certain measures to try to solidify his hold on the Jewish population of Judea. And as resistance against him builds, he ultimately declares himself to be a god and demands worship of himself in the Jerusalem temple.
The Hellenized Seleucids had maintained a loose control over Judea since Alexander the Great's empire was divided up at his death in 323 BC. Profoundly influenced by all aspects of Greek culture, Antiochus came to power in 175 BC. He cherished the intention of Hellenizing the Jewish people. In 167 BC, Jews who refused to submit to Antiochus started a war against him known as the Maccabean Revolt.
It's a perfect time to start expressing yourself with apocalyptic literature, because you can sort of hide what you're saying under the symbols, and yet people who read it, who are living in the time, they know who you're talking about when you're talking about this evil king.
In Daniel 7, Daniel has a vision in which he sees the various mythological beasts coming up out of the sea. And these represent the different empires that had afflicted Judea.
The beast is another name for the Antichrist, a tradition which began with its first appearance in the book of Daniel.
After that, in my vision at night, I looked, and there before me was a fourth beast, terrifying and frightening and very powerful.
But this beast, many historians insist, is metaphorical. It is a thinly veiled reference to the immediate oppressor of the Jews.
That it has iron teeth, which signifies that it's identified with the Greeks, who were always identified with iron in the ancient world. It has 10 horns that represent the succession of monarchs in the Seleucid Syrian Empire.
While I was thinking about the horns, there before me was another horn, a little one, which came up among them. The horn and eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth that spoke boastfully.
And this, of course, is Antiochus IV, portrayed as a braggart, portrayed as a little horn, and portrayed as subject to divine destruction.
In Daniel's vision, God intervenes, saying, "I kept looking until the beast was slain, and its body destroyed and thrown into the blazing fire."
And then it portrays the rest of the vision as an ultimate destruction of the king of the north, the Seleucid Syrian king, that in fact does not correspond to what we know happened historically.
Judah the Maccabee did indeed defeat Antiochus, but at this point, Daniel's account diverges from history. Many of his details concerning the defeat are inaccurate, and in some quarters, it is felt that the book must have been finished before the victory was achieved in December 164 BC. Daniel's Apocalypse, however, still performs the traditional function of a prophetic text.
We get the three main notions. First of all, a portrayal of the persecution felt by this community. Second, a promise that those responsible for this persecution will be punished. And third, that there will be an exaltation of those who remain faithful.
Believers in prophecy dispute the historical interpretation of Daniel.
Hundreds of prophecies from the Old Testament that foretold the coming of Jesus physically as a baby in Bethlehem were fulfilled literally. So we're saying, why wouldn't the New Testament prophecies and some of the Old Testament prophecies about the second coming and the Antichrist and all that also be fulfilled literally?
But more sanguine academics claim prophecy isn't the point of apocalyptic literature.
Apocalyptic literature is really not written to tell you the future. That may sound a little shocking. People read apocalyptic literature in order to try to understand their present situation, why things are not going right for the right people.
Is the book of Daniel history or prophecy? Is it encouragement to the oppressed Jews of the 2nd century BC, or the work of a visionary foreseeing the end of time? The debate is typical of the controversy that surrounds most of the Bible's apocalyptic texts. And nowhere does that controversy become more heated than with reference to the New Testament's Book of Revelation. The Book of Revelation speaks to us across the centuries. It is a fascinating but obscure text, teeming with fantastical images of sea monsters and seven-headed beasts.
You'll have beasts in the Revelation of John, and the mystic numbers and various fantastical creatures and all the rest of it, dreams and visions.
As is the case with the Book of Daniel, the word antichrist does not occur in Revelation. In fact, the word only appears 5 times in all the collected books of the Bible. It appears in 2 books of the epistles, which are traditionally ascribed to John the Apostle, but were probably written by one of his disciples. However, for those seeking prophecy, Revelation represents God's most forceful communication about the Antichrist and the final days of life on earth. As in the book of Daniel, some of the strongest imagery in Revelation describes a beast.
The beast was given a mouth to utter proud words and blasphemies.
He's going to be charismatic, he's going to be well-liked, he's going to be persuasive, he's going to be spiritual, he's going to be insightful, and he will encourage everybody with hope.
And he was given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation.
Surely the world will hail him and honor him and respect him, and at the end worship him.
No one could buy or sell unless he had the mark, which is the name of the beast or the number of his name, 666.
He is going to require people to receive that number, and what I think it is a prefix that is added to their individual number. For instance, my Social Security number.
While believers see the Antichrist in such passages, the majority of scholars argue that Revelation is not about the future, but instead it refers to the past. And it can only be understood in its historical context. It is generally accepted that Revelation, the last book of the Christian Bible, was written in the 1st century AD during the reign of the Roman Emperor Domitian.
It's no longer the community of Jews, but the community of Christians who are being persecuted by the Roman Empire.
So if something is to happen in society, say an earthquake, a famine, economic failure, whatever, it was very easy for someone in society then to blame it upon the Christians.
They saw the Antichrist everywhere in the culture. They saw the Antichrist telling them In order to serve in the Roman army, you had to literally worship at the statue of the emperor.
Deliverance, meanwhile, was not forthcoming. New Testament texts, like Paul's letters to the Thessalonians, had prophesied that Christ would return within the lifetime of first-century readers. But those prophecies were not fulfilled.
It's now 2 generations since the death of Jesus, and the end hasn't come. The Antichrist helps explain why the end hasn't come. There's still demonic forces at work.
It is within this context of perplexity and doubt about the second coming of Jesus that John of Patmos wrote the book of Revelation in about 95 AD. Exiled on the barren Greek island for preaching the gospel, John addressed his revelation to 7 Christian churches in Asia Minor, which is now Turkey.
Then I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising up from out of the sea.
And we find out that one of the administrators of Satan's work here on earth is the beast from the sea.
And of course, the Hebrew people never became seafaring people. They were a land-based culture. Anything that came from across the sea was foreign, and it was suspicious, it was usually evil.
One of the heads of the beast seemed to have a fatal wound, but the fatal wound had healed. The whole world was astonished and followed the beast.
It points specifically to the Roman Emperor Nero, who is believed to have committed suicide and who is then identified with this head that has this wound. Nero, of course, is a very notorious figure in the Greco-Roman world.
Nero's wound was self-inflicted.